Hello everyone. In today's video I will be showing you a few tips on creating a realistic looking skin tone when you're painting. And I will be using watercolor paints today. The same principles and colors can still be used with oil paints or acrylics or even dry medium like colored pencil. So yeah, whatever it is that you like doing. To start out with, to create a good skin tone, I like to use a yellow, a red, and a blue for your highlights, midtones, and shadows. So here on my palette, it's kind of dried up. I do have a lighter yellow, a cad red, and a cobalt or cerulean blue. Can't remember which one I used, or maybe I mixed them. Obviously, I'm like super precise with my colors. For a lighter skin tone, and if you want a darker skin tone, I usually use a burnt umber, cad red, and ultramarine blue. And you don't have to use these colors exactly. I know when I started painting, I was super intimidated when professors would list off all these specific colors they used. Experiment with different yellows and reds and blues and see what works for you. And we will dive right in. So for this first one, I will use some of the lighter colors. I find painting somebody with a lighter skin tone is actually more difficult than a darker skin tone because the colors you use are a little bit more pastel-y and it can get out of control really quick. For darker skin tones, you usually use earthier colors, deeper colors, richer colors, and it doesn't go bad as easily as it does for lighter skin tone. So here I'm going to start laying in the lighter areas with this yellow. And notice I don't care that I'm painting over some of the whites of the eyes. A mistake that a lot of people make when starting out is they will leave the whites of the eyes just blinding white, and it ends up looking a little strange because most people's eyes aren't that white. There's color and shadow and stuff in there. Then I'm going to come in with some mid-tone with the red. And I'm keeping this pretty light, pretty saturated. I don't want strong, intense yellows and reds because then that will not look very natural. And now with the blue. That blue is a little bit too intense, but that's okay. Then I can come in here with a clean, dry brush and kind of lift out some of these colors where I want it to be a little bit lighter. There does seem to be a little bit of blue in my brush, so it's retaining a little blue. But anyway, that's the idea for the first initial lay-in of color. And here I have two that are already dry for a lighter and a darker skin tone. I like to layer the colors a lot. If you just mix the colors on your palette, I don't know how well you can see here, this is kind of the spectrum of color, and if you just mix them all together, it just kind of turns into a muddy color, and it doesn't have a lot of life in the finished product. So now with this dry one, I'm going to come in and start adding a little bit more color, a little bit darker color to get some of those more intense shadows. I'm going to come in with a wet brush and just kind of gradiate out this color. You don't want any really hard lines when you're watercoloring. And so for the watercoloring, I am loosening up and thinning out the paint with just plain water. If you were oil painting or acrylic painting and you didn't want really intense, overpowering pastel colors, you would just tone it down with some white. Come in with some more blue. And with watercolor, I am trying to work very quickly, but you can be a little bit more loose and free-flowing. If I were doing an oil painting or something, I'd be a lot more precise. And I'm going to mix over on my palette that is out of shot some ultramarine blue and some burnt umber together, because that makes a really nice dark. Not quite black. You can make it cooler or warmer than black. So I'm trying to make a nice warm gray right now. And my area that I was painting in is probably still wet, so this might get kind of bleed out a little bit, but we'll see if we can get it to work as I come in to get some of these dark areas. I did switch over to a smaller brush, just because it's a little bit easier to control when doing some of these smaller things. So you can see on the edges it is fuzzing out a little bit. That is just fine. I'm going to come back in with some red and bring out this shadow shape just a little bit. The red is important because if you have too much blue, it'll kind of cool down the face, which if the person you're painting is in a cool light, that works. But the red just makes it warm, gives it a little bit of life. Let me see if I can clean up these lines just a little bit. I'm going to see if I can lift out a highlight. To lift out paint, just get your paintbrush wet and then just kind of scrub in the area that you want light again. See how that's looking. Might come in with some blue. Just add some little spots of color. And again, if I were doing this on my own time, I'd be spending a lot more time on this. This is really trying to be very quick. I'm just kind of get something down. So that is kind of the gist of it. With darker skin tones, let's see. This is bad. With watercolor, you sometimes have to just like stop messing with it and I have trouble stopping. Okay. With darker skin tones, it's pretty much the same idea. You just use darker colors. So I'm going to come in with some ultramarine blue instead of the cerulean I was using before and start putting in some of these shadows. Which are way too dark for the rest of the face. So I'll try to lighten some of these up a little bit, soften the edges. And now I put so much blue in here that it is starting to look really cold. And so we want some more red in there to warm it up. See if I can pull out some of these highlights again. I think that looks alright, and now I can start on the darker details. So let's see if this is way too wet or not. If you want really nice crisp lines, you'll wait for it to dry completely. If you kind of like that fadey look, which sometimes you definitely want, then painting while it's still wet is a great idea. Just depends on the effect you want to go for. This I'm thinking is a little too wet still. But we'll work with it. See if we can clean it up just a little. Let's get a highlight in that eye. So some of these lines I definitely would want to be crisper and a little bit cleaner, but I'm trying to work fast. I think I'm going to add a little more shadow into here. It got a little too red. And you can just keep playing with the colors, but, and this is all totally personal preference if you want to mix more on the palette or not. I like kind of the look of chunks of color. You can see that group of red, you can see the bit of blue, and then when you kind of take a step back, it all comes together. to be a really convincing flesh tone. I like that look. Some people really like it to be perfectly blended and don't like that as much. So that's totally up to you and your preference. But working with a yellow and a red and a blue will get you the realistic skin tone you're looking for. Something to be careful of with the yellow and blue is to always kind of let the red be the buffer in between them, because if you're yellow and blue touch, you'll get green, and that's generally a bad idea for a skin tone unless you're painting somebody who's very ill. Then green is great. So that's something to be aware of. But otherwise, I think that is kind of the very hurried gist of it. It is a really complex, really difficult thing. I struggled with this for so long. I still do sometimes on certain pieces. I can't get it to look right. So just experiment, find what works for you, try out different colors that look good, and don't be afraid to try it out. And it's okay if the first couple of people you paint kind of look like they're wearing a lot of makeup. But yeah, just experiment and you'll get some really cool stuff. Anyways, thank you so much for watching. I really hope this helped. I can't stop fixing these up. But yeah, hopefully this helped if this is something you've been struggling with. And as always, thank you so much for watching.